Hey, big welcome to 2022, and no better way to start our year off with another reaction video to the Linus Tech Tips Linux series. And I believe this is episode number 4. I'm not sure if this is the last episode that they're doing. Looks like it says it's the finale. So if you know me, just a little bit of introduction. I like to go a little bit faster on the videos just because, I like to go fast. So 1.2 speed throughout the video of Linus Tech Tips. I will pause it. I will reply to anything that they're saying in the video. And without further ado, let's switch on over and let's watch this latest video.
There are a plethora of reasons to transition your daily driver gaming rig over to Linux.
You could be sticking it to the man.
Or wanting to support the open source community.
Maybe you daily drive Linux for work already.
And all your games are natively supported anyway.
Or maybe you just want a new and challenging hobby.
But if what you want is a simple, painless gaming experience, then let this be a cautionary tale. One of trials, tribulations, and of course, sponsors. Thanks to Arilo for sponsoring this video.
I'll just fast forward that. And yes, sponsors. No, I think what they're saying here immediately is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but yes, if you're sticking it to the man, if you want to kind of use the system that you use every day for work or something like that, Linux is potentially an option. Let's see what their conclusions are after doing this for, I believe, a month.
Experience, or intentionally make it look bad. We just focused on playing the games that we would normally want to play.
I'm also just going to slow this down because it actually is a little bit faster than normal.
Or at least we tried to, because not all the games that we wanted to play actually worked. The very first day I installed Linux, I also tried to play the Battlefield 2042 beta. The previous day, still on Windows, I'd owned some noobs with my buddy Joe, and we wanted to play again the next night. But that wasn't going to happen due to this challenge. It was reassuring, I guess, that even more advanced Linux users were also unable to play, but that didn't actually remedy the fact that I couldn't play games with my friends.
Well, it's a brand new game, so it may reach difficulty. You probably will have difficulty running on Windows too if it's a brand new game. Just saying.
It's funny because I assumed that this challenge would be more painful for me than it would be for Luke. I mean, after all, he has years of Linux experience while I came in with basically none.
As an observer, I think it was a little bit more difficult for Linus over the last couple of videos, but let's see where he's going with this one.
But here's the thing. I game mostly by myself as a way to relax or to hang out with my kids, and I am extremely flexible about what game I'll play. If something doesn't work, screw it, I'll just play something else. Luke, on the other hand, whose social circle is deeply immersed in gaming culture, has so much more on the line if he can't solve a problem.
Yeah, like
Ostracization? How do you say that word? He's going to be ostracized from his group if he can't play games. No. This cannot happen.
Literally had a friend ask, "Hey dude, when are you gonna be back?" Obviously, I had never actually left, but I was a lot more difficult to include as a lot of competitive games that have anti-cheat just don't work. Or it took me so long to get a lot of games to a satisfactory level that by the time I was ready, everyone else was just done gaming for the night.
Valid point about the anti-cheat, and that seems to be, from my observation, the biggest hang-up to getting gaming working with Linux natively. I'm a big Halo guy, and the day that I can play the Master Chief Collection and the new Halo 6, I guess it is, on Linux, that'd be spectacular. But it seems to be that these anti-cheat software, BattlEye and Easy Anti-Cheat, I believe they're called, they don't support Linux, and that is the biggest hang up to getting these things working for multiplayer, specifically online. I know that the Master Chief Collection, I'll speak about that because I'm a huge Halo nerd. You can play the individual games. You can play the campaigns, but you cannot play online with friends. And to me, heartbreaking.
And as a lot of my friends like to just try random games out for fun, this actually happened a lot.
Our goal is not to spread FUD about the state of Linux gaming though, so it's time to get specific about some of our less good experiences. First up is Steam, or rather, not Steam. Valve's goal of reaching 100% compatibility with the entire Steam game library is admirable. Actually, incredible. As noted by this here Reddit post, the Steam game library is chock full of amazing gaming experiences from AAA studios and indie developers alike. But it's also not the silver bullet that it would have been 10 or even 5 years ago, when nearly every game worth playing was available on Steam.
Half of Twitch's top 20 games, at least at the time of filming this, are not on Steam. And I know, being a popular game to stream doesn't
You can play chess.com though.
necessarily mean it's popular with random gamers out there, but these are all very big name games, and being on Steam isn't an automatic win either. Look at Apex Legends and New World, both massive games, both listed as borked on ProtonDB.
Native Linux
ProtonDB is actually a phenomenal resource for finding what games do and do not work on Linux. I've done a lot of research through there just for these 4 videos that I've put out, and you'll be very surprised at what is natively supported or nearly natively supported. Rocket League, for example, I had spoken about that in a couple of videos prior, kind of toes the edge between natively supported and like a platinum experience. So pretty cool.
games are obviously going to be your best bet. Want to try one of my personal favorites, Crosscode? Click install, click play, and as simple as that. I mean, I was amazed at how painlessly my Xbox One controller worked. Though I should note that I stuck with a wired connection rather than trying to tackle getting the unofficial XOW driver working.
Sometimes wires are better than wireless for various reasons.
Valheim, meanwhile, ran amazingly and immediately, demonstrating how even smaller developers can make it work if they've got the will.
In addition to that, while not necessarily native, I played Legion TD 2, Towerfall Ascension, Faster Than Light, Slay the Spire, Path of Exile, and Rust, and they all worked perfectly with zero actual effort.
I am only familiar with Rust.
And interestingly enough, Dota 2 and CSGO both had completely game-breaking problems that weren't isolated to my system during the challenge. They seem to be solved now, but it goes to show that just like with Windows, because a piece of software was made for it, doesn't mean it's actually going to be perfect.
It's a valid point that he brings up here, even that Windows experiences some troubles with gaming. Like, there's times that I have loaded a game and then I had to go into the configuration files of that game. And this is in Windows 10. And I had to do some janky ass shit. So this isn't specifically Linux. I see where the challenge lies though.
I didn't have any issues running CSGO. Even got me some kills, boys. But
Damn straight.
I did notice significantly more stutters than I'm used to seeing on this class of hardware. That could be an NVIDIA driver issue, or it could be something else entirely, but
Highly likely.
for me, it worked well enough that I didn't feel like digging any further into that rabbit hole. Not when I could be digging for a sweet hoodie like this one on lttstore.com instead.
The next tier is Windows native games that Valve officially lists as Linux capable via Steam Play. But before we go any further, I just want to say massive respect to the incredible teams who have worked tirelessly to make running Windows games on Linux possible.
Amen. And I think that has to be a massive, massive thing that we talk about with the challenge that these guys are doing, is that these are independent parties that have come together to support this pipe dream of having every game in a library work on a completely different operating system. It's amazing. And one thing I will add is the anti-cheat issue is, again, it's kind of the fragmented nature of gaming, is that, yeah, the game studio creates the game, but then they run additional software on top of it. And just because that additional software doesn't work natively with Linux, that's where you run into issues. So we'll continue.
Valve's Proton compatibility layer is amazing. It's forked from Wine, which has been multiple decades in the making, with about half of its source code written by volunteers. That's freaking wild.
Like this, what he's saying is amazing. And then on top of that, 10 years ago, this would have been like completely unviable. So the independent developer, like the you and me, probably potentially even you watching this right now that contribute to this, it's amazing.
And of course, honorable mentions all around for the dedicated communities that maintain tools like Lutris, which automates hacky workarounds for newbies, and ProtonDB, which serves as both a troubleshooting resource and a reference for which games work so you won't have to waste your money on a bad experience. With all of that said, in spite of all of that work, we're honestly just not there yet. And we're mere months from the launch of the Steam Deck, when 100% compatibility is supposedly coming, which, as of writing this, just got pushed back by 2 months to February.
I fully agree with Luke, like it's not completely there yet.
Also, Doom Eternal reported great performance on my system, over 200 frames per second using the included tool. I'm kind of reminded of the issues that we used to see in old SLI configurations, where the actual perceived animation smoothness is substantially less than what the benchmark seems to suggest it should be. Again, I thought maybe this is an issue with my proprietary NVIDIA driver. Maybe it's out of date, but Manjaro begs to differ. Apparently, I am up to date, so your mileage may vary. Another problem that's been a thorn in the side of the Linux community for years is anti-cheat. Now,
Here it comes.
the game launches and seems to run totally fine, but while theoretically enabling BattleEye anti-cheat in Rainbow Six Siege is as simple as Ubisoft reaching out, doing a little bit of kajiggering and off we go, because BattleEye has supposedly supported Linux for ages, Ubisoft hasn't done that yet. Why?
Well, because natively
Why?
supporting Linux is seen by some developers as a somewhat brutal experience. Ben Gaulis has a rather enlightening thread about this on Twitter. He goes on to explain that while Linux gamers were a very vocal part of their pre-launch community, they accounted for less than 0.1% of sales, yet they generated more than 20% of auto-reported crashes and support tickets.
That sounds like the Linux community as a whole. It's a very valid point, is that the market share isn't there. So how do you get the market? It's the chicken and egg problem, excuse me. It's, do we get more users so that we can develop for those users? But how do we get those users in the first place, right?
He also stated that near the end of his time there, nearly 100% of tickets were still Linux related, despite Linux receiving the majority of the engineering effort, meaning the company likely spent hundreds of thousands of dollars supporting a community that made them a few hundred in sales revenue.
This is Pareto's principle in practice, right? Like the 80-20 rule, except this is something similar, excuse me. This is more akin to like 99-1 or worse. So I see why the effort isn't going into it, because where's the return on investment?
And this isn't the only version of this story. And every time problems like these happen, it's just more ammo for developers that would rather spend zero time working on Linux versions of their products. I believe that is why over 65% of reported anti-cheat enabled games have not confirmed Linux compatibility, despite many of the anti-cheat developers getting on board.
And as much as everyone already knows it, it bears repeating. The fragmentation problem continues to be desktop Linux's greatest obstacle to widespread adoption. Take It Takes Two, for example. This is a gold-rated Windows-native Origin game that I got running effortlessly, though I did buy it through Steam and I did launch it through Steam. At least it was effortless until I wanted to have two controllers running at the same time. Kind of a requirement for this particular game if I want to play it with the wife. That sent me on a quest to Proton DB to see if anyone else had had the same problem. And no, not really. Everyone else's problems are basically random. So, guess we're not playing that game for now. One of my other favorite games, Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, was as simple to run as clicking install and enabling a couple of launch flags. Awesome! But if you want to play multiplayer, whoo boy! Here's the story. When gas-powered games went under, a small community arranged to preserve multiplayer support for the game by building their own launcher. It is an amazing example of the way that the PC gaming community can come together to preserve experiences that would otherwise be completely lost due to corporate buttholery.
Again, this is the issue with, you can run campaigns, you can run the underlying game, but when it comes to multiplayer, and a lot of games are not even, like, there's so many games nowadays. Rainbow Six Siege is a great example. There's no campaign whatsoever. There's like one game that you can, or there's one mode that is offline and you don't have to play it online with friends. But as a broad generality, a lot of these games are going to completely online use. And when you introduce that, this is where this falls short.
Unfortunately, every guide I could find to get the Forged Alliance Forever launcher working on Linux was either hopelessly out of date or not applicable to my particular distro. I don't blame the devs. really, nothing but love for you guys. But Linux gamers, and more broadly, the Linux community, needs to understand that until the burden of supporting Linux is reduced significantly, this is always going to be a problem.
It's a very valid point in that there's so much fragmentation across distributions, across even just package managers and use cases, that if we have to support every single one of these, the effort is a insurmountable mountain, right?
We actually live streamed trying to work through the Forged Alliance issues on Floatplane. Subscribe, by the way. There were more than a few comments in the chat criticizing us for choosing to play that particular game because it's old, it's just some crappy Java game, it's obscure, or because it's not fair to Linux, or whatever.
But the bottom line is that none of that matters. What matters is that we like it, and we wanted to play it, but instead of doing that, we played Terminal Command Simulator. And honestly, I've gone through enough of that over the last month that it has sucked a lot of the enjoyment out of using my computer. Like, I have a pretty busy life, and when I manage to salvage an hour to relax and play video games, that is what I want to do. And it's really opened my eyes to why so many people choose to play on console instead of on PC. Like, this has got to be how a not super computer savvy user feels about updating a driver or fixing a firewall setting every time they just want to play a bloody game.
It's an exceptionally valid point in that, have you ever really had an issue when you fired up your console to play a game and then liken that to your experience on PC, even just on Windows? There's the issue is that there's so much underlying software that could impact the experience, right? As opposed to on a console where everything is a completely closed ecosystem. There's no real worries or additions or subtractions that you have in software. And really the only difference in most of these consoles nowadays is storage capacity. And even that is going out the window too. So we have to take into account all of the different underlying softwares that allow us to game on top of them. And that in and of itself is, again, a massive hurdle, not just with Linux, but with every single computer operating system. It's why potentially something along the lines of a Dockerization of an environment may be something that could be a potential into the future of doing something like this, and where if you want to game on Linux, you have to install a complete system that is completely tailored to that. And even then, we'd probably run into issues still.
To be clear, I would never say that just because some old game doesn't run, it means that Linux sucks. In fact, I've permanently switched my laptop over to Linux because there are a lot of things it just does really well, even for someone more on the noob side of things like me. What it does mean is that gaming on Linux can kind of suck.
Exceptionally valid point. This machine that I'm recording this video on runs Linux. All of my work computers run Linux. All of my laptops run Linux. And that allows me to have a certain workflow that I wouldn't have on any other operating system. And I've built that workflow out piece by piece by piece for me, myself. The possibility of doing something like that on Windows, it just isn't there. But the caveat comes, do I game on this operating system? Do I game on any of my laptops? The answer is no, I don't. So there are still things that Windows does better than Linux. There's things that Linux does better than Windows. And to say that we have to go one direction with complete disregard for the other direction, we're coming from a legacy too, right? Windows has always been the operating system that people developed games for. If we want to change that paradigm, there's a lot of friction involved in doing so. Let's continue.
It's not that I don't enjoy tinkering with PCs as a hobby. I mean, man, the rush when Anno 1800 launched after spending a bunch of time fighting with it, it was phenomenal. I felt like the king.
I should insert the GoldenEye guy. I'm king of the world. I'm a genius.
Yes! I am invincible!
The feeling happens at least, a couple times a week to me as well.
But then the next 45 minutes of, okay, why isn't multiplayer connecting, completely destroyed that vibe. You know, is it because Luke installed the game through the script on the Lutris page, and then I Lutrist Ubisoft Connect and installed the game through that, resulting in a version mismatch? Is it because of some kind of Manjaro firewall nonsense? The answer ended up being that multiplayer used to work, which helped Anno 1800 get a gold rating on ProtonDB, but now it does not.
Which is...
Just before I let Luke go again, that's exactly what I was bringing up before, is that even the way that you install the program is different across the board. So if you could create a standard procedure in which you get a game running, and that became the only standard, then developing for it would not be so difficult. But because people use Snap, or they use Flatpak, or they just use the native repository for the distribution or whatever, that's where you run into issues. Let's continue.
Isn't to say it won't ever work again. If you're a Linux developer wizard, you might be able to fix it yourself, or you might end up just needing to wait for the community to patch it. But anything that relies on an external service that updates independently of your computer can just unexpectedly break, and that's a lot of games these days.
So you always need to make sure that you read, especially the recent comments, rather than just relying on the rating on ProtonDB. Another prime example of this is Minecraft Dungeons. Works great, apparently. Well, as long as you happen to own it through Steam, rather than through Microsoft directly with the old launcher.
Again.
Because in that case, apparently you can make it work. But for most people, I think it's safe to say that you're just going to have to rebuy the game. So I haven't been able to play that with my kids in a month.
Which is quite ridiculous, to be honest with you.
That ended up being an ongoing theme of this challenge. ProtonDB, again, respect for all the work that you do. It can save you a lot of time, but it won't just automatically fix all your problems. Gold, to me, should mean a pretty typical gamer can do it. So while the rating system makes for a very impressive story on the homepage, did you know, fellow gamers, that 78% of the top 100 games are gold or better on Linux? Wow. The truth is a lot less rosy.
And there's another big problem with ProtonDB. It only includes Steam games. And while you can use the Proton compatibility layer on non-Steam games, even considering tools like Lutris, the compatibility picture outside of Steam is not as simple as, well, ProtonDB says Linux gaming compatibility is good.
One thing I'll mention too is that gold means different things across the board on that site. So that is the difficulty that I think you'd run into in using that as your definitive guide to what games work and what games don't. Because platinum does not mean platinum in a lot of cases. Gold does not mean gold in a lot of cases. If a game is native, let's say native, that means that it's generally 100% ready to work. But platinum, there's still hangups, and it's still rated platinum. I don't know how the rating system works. It's almost like when you go to a review site and 90% of things are, 4 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5. What's actually a 1 out of 5, or what's actually a 5 out of 5? The difficulty is there. Again, no shade is being thrown at ProtonDB because they do exceptional work with trying to help people out with this.
I mentioned Escape from Tarkov earlier. It's been broken for so long that due to Battlestate Games adding anti-cheat, their Linux Discord has turned into a matchmaking channel for other games so they can have some fun while they wait. Genshin Impact, kind of a huge game right now, no Linux compatibility. And while I did manage to find a honestly really great Russian guide from Penguin Gang that I could probably follow, it illustrates a point that I haven't really talked about much yet. Being on Linux can take a lot of the spontaneity out of gaming. You can't just be like, oh cool, that game looks neat, and expect to be playing it in just a few minutes. I also hope you're not necessarily a fan of playing games right on launch. Forza Horizon 5, for example. Amazing, straight up fantastic that people got it working within just 5 days of launch. But that also means that it wasn't working for 5 days after the launch.
Yeah. I mean, this is a valid point, but at the same time, right, we're supporting a initial operating system on launch, and within 5 days, you're able to make it work on Linux. why are we talking more about that? But at the same time, I get where you're coming from. Dual boot your system. Play the game for 5 days on Windows. Come on back over to Linux when it's supported in 5 days.
And if all your friends were playing, they now have sick cars, and you're stuck trudging through the swamps for a barn find.
To be clear, I don't want this to take away from some of the great experiences that I've had gaming on Linux in the last month. After an extremely short setup, my daughter was happily hanging out in a Discord voice channel with her siblings playing Minecraft Java Edition and had no idea she was on a completely different platform. That's freaking amazing. Luke and I had some awesome Don't Starve Together sessions, totally stable, no crashes, and more recently, my son and Luke and I had a blast pinning each other to walls in Towerfall using Remote Play Together, which worked great on Linux. Overall, I'm really happy I did the challenge. I learned a lot, and it gave me a lot of hope for the future, and I will absolutely be trying to stick with Linux when the Steam Deck shows up sometime next year. But to summarize the
This year.
question that we set out to answer, is this the year of the Linux desktop? For gamers, the answer is no. I'm sorry. And the more niche your use case gets, maybe you're super into modding or the racing or flight sim scenes, or maybe you're a big VR lover, the more resounding that no gets.
Very valid point.
And if I'm being honest, I'm in the same camp. But something has given me a lot of hope, and that's how much positivity we've seen from the Linux community in spite of our concerns. Because even if I'm not ready to convert my gaming rig just yet, it gives me hope that one day the meme will end and the year of the Linux desktop will come. I'm as anti-monopoly as anyone, and I'd hate to see the status quo maintained forever.
I know what I don't hate is our sponsor. Thanks Squarespace for...
All right, we'll end it there. I do get where these guys are coming from, and it is exactly how I would feel about it too. So, in summary, I think that if you want a game, and you want to do it on Linux, consider it that it's going to be a challenge. And challenges are not necessarily bad. We're getting philosophical here. But it will be a challenge nonetheless. You're going to have to go through some hoops to make things work. And that's just the status of things on January 1st, 2022. Is that how it's always going to be? No. But videos like this, where there is a massive following behind the creator that's doing the video and making people aware of Linux in and of itself is a win in my books. I've had so many comments on my personal videos and how people have just watched these videos and all of a sudden they've tried to experiment with various new Linux operating systems and they've never done that before. To me, that's exceptionally cool. I think that if you want to game, I don't want to say it, but you're going to probably need to keep a Windows side on your computer. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, what I do recommend anybody that's watching this to do is to try out Linux. See how you can do your daily workflow on a Linux operating system and see how much it differs. Because my guess is not that much. Unless you're using something like an Adobe suite for video editing and audio editing and Photoshop and all of that, that's when you're going to run into some issues. But there are so many free and open source alternatives that you can get into. And to me, they've completely replaced the Adobe suite of things for me. I use GIMP for Photoshop. I use Davinci Resolve for all of my video editing. This video that you're watching right now is going to be edited on there. There's so many alternatives. So my challenge to you this year is to explore, to give it a shot and see how much your life would change if you actually switched over to something that is completely free and open source and doesn't want to do anything with your data, but keep you more secure, keep your privacy intact. And yeah, to me, it's a very, using Linux has completely changed my life in 99 out of 100 ways for the better. I'm going to get into that in a future video about how I personally use a computer. And I think it's going to be a paradigm shift for you in thinking, hey, this is how I have to use a operating system, into, wow, this is what I could potentially be doing. And these are the customizations I can do. And I can make this 100% my own experience. To me, the benefit far outweighs the cost in doing that. But I'm also not a massive gamer. And if I wanted to game a lot of the time, I mean, for New Year's Eve, we had a buddy of mine bring over his GameCube. So you see where I'm coming from. I'm not always the best guy to talk about gaming and such, but when it comes to using Linux on a daily basis to get work done and to, you know, do your general day-to-day, I think it's 100% the year of the Linux desktop. So welcome to 2022, the year of the Linux desktop. We're calling it right here, right now on this channel. Thank you so much for watching this, you guys. If you liked this, feel free to subscribe, leave a comment, really helps me out. And I will see you in the next video. I aim to do one video per week on technology, what's going on in the world, kind of my thoughts on everything. So feel free to stick around, join the community, and thank you so much for watching. Have a very happy new year. See you in the next one.